All right, welcome everybody. There we go. We have live mics now. Come on in. This is the Big Data Meets Social Media panel. Lots of room up front for anyone who wants to come in. My name is Laurie Baird, and I am part of the team here at the Institute for People and Technology. I want to thank you all for coming today. We have what I think is going to be a really exciting panel. As many of you know, big data has been growing in importance for a very long time, fairly well-established way of finding out consumer insights for manufacturing, for business. And of late, there's been a lot of attention on social media, and oftentimes those two worlds seem very different. One was very organized, quantified, the other kind of the Wild West and the craziness. But not only, as someone just mentioned to me coming up to this, in the election was this union between big data and social media very much in the limelight for identifying the key areas to focus your attention. It's really becoming a great area to exploit. So we have some really fun people here, very knowledgeable people on my panel today that I want to introduce you to, who will tell us a little bit more about what this new world will look like. So first, on stage right, your left, is Polo Chau. He is an assistant professor here at the School of Computational Science and Engineering, and his research bridges data mining, human-computer interactions to synthesize systems and tools that help people understand and interact with big data. So there's a lot in that sentence that we'll get to, but not just big data, but how do you search through it, how do you understand it, how do you communicate it, given the limitations of our own human brains. Next to Polo is Eric Gilbert. Eric is an assistant professor in the School of Interactive Computing, and he leads the Comp Social lab here, which is a research group that focuses on building and studying social media. So we'll find a lot about what's latest, greatest there, and these two worlds connecting. Next up, we have Mike Hess, and Mike joins us from the Nielsen company. Mike joined Nielsen's in May of 2011 and runs the data fusion and integration business for the media advertising analytics group. And I come from the media industry, and Nielsen has always been held up as the source of gold standard in data. So very interested in hearing Mike's views. And last, we have Radhika Subramanian, who hopefully many of you know here. Radhika is the CEO of Emcien, and she's a serial entrepreneur and very active in the technology community here in Atlanta. And her company is a provider of purpose-built, pattern-based analytical solutions that enable organizations to convert complex data into actionable intelligence. So with that, I'm going to start, even though we're not sitting the way I thought, the goal was to look at the big picture, look at some of the challenges, look at some of the solutions, but I really want this to be interactive, so I'm encouraging my panelists to talk. And those of you in the audience, if you have questions, feel free to walk up to the mic even during our first part of this conversation. And if I'm able to multiplex, I'll be checking in with the Twitter feed to see if there are comments there. So first off, I want to ask Eric, what excites you about this intersection between big data and social media from your perspective?
Yeah, so like you said, I work in the Wild West of social media where things are not organized. So I think the thing that excites me the most is the ability to see what people are doing at very, very large scales and with very high resolution. So from a research point of view, there's this idea that we can computationalize social science based on this kind of data. So for example, and I think a good way, oftentimes when I talk about my work, one of the things that I do is I talk about it in terms of examples. So one of my students, for example, is working on what features within images make them go viral. So we're using machine vision to look at color distributions and flesh tones and objects and complexity of images to see how that corresponds to how far they transfer or how far they get repinned on Pinterest or how many times they get retweeted on Twitter, right? And this has, I think on one side it has business value, right? If you want your images to go viral, use more red than blue, right? But it also has very interesting kind of deep social science reasons like, oh, why are we attracted to red more than blue? And why do we share that more? And how many faces does it take for us to click the repin button? Which I think are pretty fascinating.
Great, thanks. Mike, very curious from your perspective.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me make just a comment that I feel like I'm in the midst of locals here. And part of the reason for flying in right after post-Sandy and post-Nor'easter to fly here anyway is because I knew I would learn something, and I think I have already. From Eric's comment, red is better than blue, so I'm going to keep that in mind. My original background was in experimental psychology, so that interests me too. Blue is better than red in some cases, and here it's red is better than blue. But my interest is because besides working in data fusion and data integration, I also in the last 6 months got heavily involved and added social TV analytics to my title, to my work effort. And I think everybody knows the Nielsen brand name. We stand for a number of different things, but definitely including TV ratings. Everybody knows the Nielsens and so on. And so this intersection is very exciting because a lot of people are interested in social data in and of itself. But beyond that, work that I have done in the last 6 months and continue to work on, connecting buzz from the BBG, the boards, blogs, and groups, to TV ratings, to program ratings. We know that there's an impact of buzz on ratings, and one of the issues I'm examining is how much of buzz is actually causal, if you will, and how much of it is indicative, because it feels bivalent, a term I'm happy to use at Georgia Tech, but it feels like programs influence tweets and buzz, but at the same time, buzz and tweets also influence program ratings. I'm trying to work to tease that out. So there are many other reasons I'm interested, but that's a main focus right now, that's a big area of interest for us and, of course, for our clients.
Great. Radhika.
Well, first, Laurie, thanks for having this panel. I'm actually going to challenge the title, right? So it says big data meets social media. I'm going to take a step back. Guys, let's actually talk about big data. When you look inside organizations, right, they've had data. When did data become big data? Data became big data when you took data across different silos. So within an organization, they would have sales data, customer information, product information, market segments, you bring it all together. The big is actually connecting it across silos, okay? So now let's kind of take a step back and look at social media. Social media is data. Social media is not big data. And I would actually tell you the reason Facebook's valuation is in the toilet is because it's not big data. So what does Facebook know? Facebook knows all the chatter and all the pictures. What do they not know? They don't know what you're buying, what you're transacting, what your risk profile is. They need additional information to make their data big data and actually be useful. So I was on this panel with Laurie and actually Eric, and there's this woman who said, Facebook showed me this ad for this dress that I'm wearing, and they didn't, Facebook didn't know I had bought it. And I thought, yeah, because they know your preference, but they don't know you bought the information. You actually bought this dress. So I would actually like to tell you that when you hear this word big data, it's not just the size. That's not what it's about. It's the fact that we're bringing disparate pieces of information together to really build a profile of behavior, risk, what's going to happen, terrorist activities, intel, all kinds of different things. Big data is not about size. Big data is across silos. It's across dimensionality. So what are your dimensions? That's what big data is about.
Thank you. Great comments. Polo, now from your perspective.
So everyone talked about a great comment already, so it's a little for me to talk about. So what my interest, or what I think where social media intersect big data is that it really enabled us to do a lot of things that previously we weren't able to do or to understand at much smaller scale. So now you have social media, you have information about basically about everyone in the world. So you can run a lot of experiments, previously probably at a much smaller scale, like looking at how people are connected, and then we do those experiments at a much larger scale. For example, like looking at how people how many connections, how many degrees of separation people are. So there's a few years back a paper to look at that actually, was still true. Like even at this much larger scale, people are on average still separated by 6 degrees of freedom. And also from my interest is that I think all this amount of data enables us to kind of push the boundary as the techniques, how well they can work previously and how well they can work now on this data. So we learned that in data mining machine learning, for example, or in big data analysis, there's a lot of algorithms that have previously developed even just a few years ago that used to work really well, doesn't work well at all because of the scale, the velocity, the variety, all these things. So my interest is in how to push the boundary or develop better methods to kind of let these techniques to work better for big data or social media, yes.
Great. So next question, I'm going to pitch to Eric first, but I want everyone to join in. And this is that, in industry, in my world, often people are incredibly excited about social. That's going to be the most important source of information available. And I personally think of things that are challenges, some of which Radhika had mentioned. But how much of a panacea is it for a shortcut for gaining consumer insights? And more specifically, and this is, I must say, start with Eric, but ask all of them, what types of questions is it good at answering?
So I'm going to say, no, it's not a panacea. I think it's certainly a really interesting source of information, but not a panacea. So a good example of one of the biases that social data has is that people tell you good things in their lives, right? They don't tell you things on Facebook and Twitter that make them look stupid, unhappy, malcontent, right? And so there's a structural bias in the data. Like, I think we're all much happier people on Facebook and Twitter than we are in the actual real world, right? So there are these biases to overcome. Like, when you're thinking from a purely analytic standpoint, you're seeing a slice through reality that is slightly altered, right? And it's good to keep that in mind. That said, there's been a ton, and I just learned something from you. There's been a ton of interesting connections between the kinds of things people talk about on Facebook and Twitter and their real-world outcomes. So, for example, there was a paper published in Nature, which is one of the top, so if you're a scientist, you would aspire once in your life to write a paper in Nature. There was a paper in Nature 6 months ago that talked about the I voted button on Facebook during the 2008 election. Facebook had this button where you could say, I voted, and it would be broadcast to all your friends. So they did this post hoc analysis and showed that made about 300,000 people go out to the polls that wouldn't otherwise have gone out to the polls. So you can go read this in Nature. So that's just one example of a bunch of interesting studies that have been done connecting the kinds of things we do on these sites to then real-world outcomes. So, just like Mike was talking about.
Excellent.
Well, I think I'd like to add to Eric's comment. There's a lot of data, right? Data is like dirt. There's just so much of it. And actually, most of it is junk, guys. So, and which kind of comes back to the comment that Polo made. You need algorithms to actually sift through this thing. And the biases that Eric talked about. How do you really get to what's meaningful? How do you eliminate 97% of the stuff that's just, I'm at Starbucks or, whatever nonsense you're going to talk about today to really get to what's insightful and what's really relevant to you? So I think what we're going to see, and this is really awesome and exciting, is I think we're going to see a surge in computational mathematics. We're going to see a surge in education for mathematics, which, I've been almost waiting for mathematics to become cool again. And so here we are. So,
Hold on, it's not cool?
Yeah.
Oops. Yeah, Nate's doing good things for us. Actually.
One thing I'd like to add to the party, especially here at Georgia Tech, I don't know how many of you have advertising backgrounds at all. By the way, it's great to be back at Georgia Tech. When I was with a small promotion and analytic consulting firm about 10 years ago, I came here every semester for about 4 semesters in a row and lectured to a market modeling class. And that professor eventually retired, so then I stopped coming. But that was a fun thing to do. And so one thing I want to share, if you don't know this already, this is worth either, there'll probably be notes of this or a webinar or write it down. But if you haven't heard the term BOE, bought, owned, and earned. Can you raise your hand if you have BOE? Okay, or else sometimes called POE, paid, owned, and earned. And so talk about panacea. I think that one thing agencies are working very carefully with their clients on, I spent 7 years with media agencies before I joined Nielsen. So they're working on this POE issue, and they're trying to determine, okay, for a total media plan, how much of it should be paid, and that's regular advertising or TV advertising, radio, print, digital, et cetera. How much of it is owned because you have a website that's owned? You have a package on the shelf with a specific label that hopefully is optimized, that's owned. And what do you think earned is? Well, that's the panacea that a lot of people think, well, you know, if I do the first two right, then I'm going to get a bunch of and it's a four-letter word that starts with F, free, okay? Free. So if I do the first two right, then I'm going to get earned is a euphemism for free. I'm going to get all this stuff for free. I think that could be a panacea because it may not be the case that like Eric was saying, hey, you don't necessarily know, is somebody going to say something bad? And if they say something bad, then what? And if they say something good, how valuable is it? So I think that earned media is very attractive as part of social. It's very attractive. But you, as a marketer, you have less control over that content. And so whereas you have complete control over the paid piece. That, for me, that's one of the panacea things that, that I think involves big data, but at the same time, be careful about. Second point, if I can give point A and point B, slightly different area in marketing that I've seen over the last couple of years is, and again, within the context of panacea, is some people are now thinking that rather than run 2 or 3 focus groups at $5,000 a piece with only 12 people, I can actually look at thousands and thousands of comments on laundry detergent or hair shampoo and so on, and I can use that information in lieu of a focus group. And to some extent, that's true. I did see a few studies at a conference a few years ago, however, that said, careful, because the presenter was good enough to show a side-by-side comparison. So the same topic, I think it had to do with men shaving. Same topic, what you would have learned from the BBG, the boards, blogs, and groups, for free in a way, or for some analytic process, versus what you actually got in the focus group. And it ended up being the intersection of 2 sets, but it didn't perfectly intersect. So there was some stuff from the focus group that a good moderator, and this is not a commercial for focus groups, but a good moderator was able to glean from the dynamics of that 12-person discussion that just didn't show up in the BBG, and vice versa. There was some stuff, just because there's so much, that jumped out that the focus group moderator couldn't get. So I think that's an interesting tension as well that addresses both panacea but also benefit.
Great. I wanted to ask Radhika, your business, you have clients in many different industries. Can you talk a little bit about who gets it? Who is really using this intersection well? What are some of the best practices you've learned from those industries that might be transferable?
Oh, that's a great question, and it kind of pings off, what Mike said, right? So, social media, of course, is kind of this huge haven for people who are marketing stuff. And it's like, wow, I can sell you one more tchotchke, one more, can of Coke, one more, blah, 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 which is kind of cool. But where it really becomes tremendously interesting is when you take that social media data and you marry it with other pieces of information that start to give you ideas of where risk profiles are increasing, where there is, threats for security. So one of the most fantastic examples that I'm going to give you is that we work with the Atlanta Police Department. And there are 2 gangs, the Bloods and the Crips, right? And never shall the 2 meet. Well, the Atlanta Police Department actually watched the 2 gangs merge because of the analytics that we could provide for them in real time. Very, very critical. So here are these people, they've been flying the red, white, and blue flag, and they thought, wow, this is not 4th of July, what's really happening over here? Right? So this kind of takes me to the next level, of social media as well. Everybody's questioning, again, it comes back to the valuation of Facebook and Twitter. Everyone's questioning the value of this data. If you use this data for just marketing one more thing, well, that's kind of cool. But if you're going to use it to save lives, if you're going to use it to keep violence down, if you're going to use it for drug trafficking, for child trafficking, things that are so important where the life of the human is involved, now the value of this information is astronomical. So that's really the way to think about what is the value of this data that we are staring at. So there are many questions that this can answer, and the value really depends on how important is it to you. Would you pay $1 million for a can of Coke? No, you wouldn't. But would you pay $1 million to keep violence down in your neighborhood? Yeah, you actually would.
So I think I have one thing to add to that is not just that social media enable us to kind of connect previous data, also actually for companies who are dealing with, for example, insecurity, that they see social media as a new way of things for kind of the badness to spread across the globe. For example, maybe even like 5 or 10 years ago, for example, the malware virus, they spread like through emails. Like you click an email, you download something, and then your machine is infected. But these days, you can just click on a link, and then that brings you to a website that are trying to exploit the vulnerability of your browser, and then your machine gets infected. So social media becomes another medium for the bad guys, basically, to do bad things that were previously not available, and also not at the scale and the speed that they could have done that. So I think for companies that deal with like security or like in that area, I mean, that become a new arena for them to study, to really understand.
You know, Paul is really right. The thing that we learned is the social media data stream is so big, it's easy to hide, right? So that's where you find people with ill intention actually hiding. And they will surface because they need to surface to sell their wares, whatever that is, or to connect with the kind of people they need to connect with. This now brings me back to the algorithms and actually distilling the sense from the noise. So all of this actually connects in a way that's going to be phenomenal. And I think we're going to see an emergence of data analysis like we've never seen before.
Could I, since Radhika was willing to challenge the title, could I challenge something Radhika said?
Please, of course.
Panels are supposed to, interact and so on. No, this is sort of a semi-serious one, but since I started my career in marketing research a number of decades ago, I really have appreciated the actual growth in data, because some of us have to run t-tests and statistical analyses, and years ago, in the 80s, if you will, maybe we could afford sample sizes of 200 against 200. We'd run a t-test on that and hope we got significance. And then more recently, we've been able to, through digital online surveys, I've been able to run surveys more like 1,000 against 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000, so bigger numbers. Needless to say, it's easier to get statistical significance there, right? The reason big data to me is important as big, and I don't know if that's petabyte, terabyte, whatever, as big is now we have access to such big numbers that not only can we find the statistical significance in the big group, which with 2,000 I could do pretty well, but now we can find smaller segments, so that if I'm literally starting with 40,000 panelists, say, in Nielsen's panel, I can find subsets there of interesting analytics with certain demos or live in a certain part of the country, that just because the data is big as big allows us to draw some conclusions that I couldn't have hoped to do with smaller sample sizes like 200 or even 2,000. So in that sense, bigger is better in that sense.
Yeah, I want to leverage off of that and actually go back to Eric. And this is really looking at the roles of the influencer, the outlier, and the sheer numbers. And certainly the sheer numbers, even if it's 10,000 users, and you can say on aggregate this is their interest, it gets much more challenging to differentiate between an influencer and an outlier, and getting into the back end of these numbers. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on there, or how you can differentiate? But all of you, but I'll start
Sure.
here.
Let me just say to Mike's point, yes. All the things you said, yes. I don't want to get too technical about like statistical methods, but yes. But to your point, so there's been a thread of research in the last, and some of it funded by industry, some of it coming out of academia, to try to find essentially Malcolm Gladwell's influencers. Interestingly, no one's been able to find it yet. So there was a paper, and one of my friends wrote a paper looking at massive diffusion events on Facebook, 74 million of them. And diffusion events are when one person spreads something, another person spreads it, another person, the huge chains of diffusion. And is there any commonality between the people who start those things across 74 million events? No. It's a very surprising result. And so it's actually challenging the research community to think, well, we see these diffusion events going on, and you're telling me there's no signal in the noise. What's going on? And so one of the leading theories is there aren't influencers, there are influenceable people. Which is a different way of framing the question, right? Or a different way of framing the situation. So we don't have an answer to this. Maybe we will in 5 years, but I think it's a really intriguing state of the field at the moment.
Then maybe a follow-up question would then, so did that research look at the characteristics of the influenceable people then?
I don't know if that's been done at that scale.
Well, we should do a paper.
All right. Let's do it.
Again, a small debate though, Eric. I feel like there's a lot of psychographic research before big data, just with market segments, because you can segment folks demographically. And actually what I lectured about here a decade ago was psychographic segmentation, where I think last night at the cocktail party somebody said, hey, a good example of big data is an 8-year-old and a 90-year-old, even though demographically they're very different, could both be gamers, right? And so psychographically they have some similarities. And I feel like in the much of the psychographic segmentation I've seen, including work that I did, might have an early adopter, column, a later adopter, and so on. But the early adopters, not only were they early, but often they were influencers. And then those influencers, in fact, did have an impact on their friends. Like, hey, I bought the big TV. You should buy the big TV.
I think
what are you saying?
I think there is research in terms of buying stuff. Okay. The research I'm looking at, that I'm talking about, is more like spreading viral videos, for example. And there seems to be no relationship. But yes, I've seen. You're absolutely right. There is a bunch of research coming out of the 70s, 80s, 90s, pre-big data, suggesting that there are these segments, right, and they do have characteristics. We're just not seeing that when it comes to kind of internet scale events, which I agree with you. Everybody expected to find it, right? We expected to find it and didn't.
Well, I'd like to add that the comment, Mike, was actually from me on the.
Oh, were you the one?
Yes, it really was. And so, which kind of brings me back to, I'm not saying that the size of the big is not relevant. Of course, it is relevant, but it's the depth that that makes it harder. Which actually brings me to the next piece, which is that standard methods of statistics, the way we understand it, are going to go by the roadside. So companies like SAS will almost become irrelevant if they're just going to keep peddling the same junk that they're peddling. And I know you're going to say yes to that, right? So.
No. So, this is why we were selected, right? So
why is it that people say, "Oh, I'm just going to take a sample of this"? Because statistics was designed for small data sets and silly data sets for mean, median, and mode. We are beyond that. We are looking at the kind of data, the kind of dimensionality. We're asking the type of questions that really requires a resurgence of a new sort of data analysis, a new form of statistics, a new set of metrics that we have not even thought about before, which kind of brings me back to Eric's questions, So it all kind of ties. This is really time for us to sit down with a clean sheet of paper and ask, what are we really looking for? Whether we're trying to sell them stuff, whether we're looking for groups of people. Like market segmentation, right? Everyone knows, let's create a market segmentation. So the example I gave where a 9-year-old and an 80-year-old come together, there's no statistics that would find that. So what are the algorithms that help Emcien to really surface that? That's what it's about.
Oh, I want to flip this around a little bit. In our call last week, Polo was talking about the personal side of integrating and understanding data. And so we talked about the algorithm side. But Polo, maybe you can start a conversation about saying what are the skills or the mindset that people who are actually sitting and analyzing data need to come to grips with, and what tools might there be to help with that, help our limited brain?
Okay. So I'll make my best comment on it. So I'm teaching a course next semester, so actually I'm trying to design a syllabus and make sure that I got to train the next generation of data scientists, which is a really hot term these days. So to me, I think it definitely needs a combination of things. So it needs to know the fundamentals in, say, data mining and machine learning, like how to, a little bit about statistics, because a lot of the algorithms are actually based on statistical model. So definitely that area. And also they need to have some skills or knowledge in how to build a system, not just knowing the skills, but also know how to deploy it, how to implement it. So the system thing is another thing. And I think the third probably really important part is how to build interactive system that can visualize the data or let people interact with the data. Because just having a model is not enough. The model tells you numbers, but then you want to make people understand what's happening or what's the model showing you, and to visualize it. And also sometimes the model makes mistakes, right? So we need to correct it. So how do you do it? So a lot of algorithms claim that they can kind of incorporate feedback, but how do you do that? You need an interface or user interface or visualization to let people to do it, to change things, and which will eventually feed back to the model. So I think there are three things: the human side of visualization, interactivity, the system being able to deploy it, and then also the fundamental methods. So I think those are the three things that I think would be essential.
And I know, Radhika, in some of your programs, you had some very interesting ways of surfacing or clustering information. Can you talk a little bit about some things you've learned there?
Oh, sure. But I'm going to kind of, add on to Polo's point. The election that we went through is a phenomenal example of what I think is required as we go through, the next kind of revolution on data. I think we're going to need a gut feel, a gut check for, is this a right answer, right? So when the Republicans sat back and they said, hey, we're going to win, blah, 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 did the numbers really tell them what, they wanted to believe? Was it actually telling them stuff that they were not listening to? So there is almost a new dimensionality of number sense that we're going to have to come up with, right? So very often I will read media articles and the journalist will publish a number that is so completely nonsensical. People will read it and, it'll become a soundbite, and it's kind of this beer and diaper thing which drives me completely nuts because it was complete nonsense, right? So I think one of the things we, as we educate our, the next generation is, how do you make sense out of data? When somebody tells you something, how do you know that, what? Yeah, that actually is kind of sort of right, and I'm not going to get fooled by it. And so there's a sense of that. That skill set is going to give rise to the next level of data scientists. People are not going to be able to go through the data, but what they can do is they can tell you a good egg from a bad egg. The mathematics is going to still surface the intelligence, but they're going to say, I think that is directionally right. Kind of like a stockbroker. I think that's a good stock for me to trade on. That's the new generation of data scientists. So all this junk that the Wall Street Journal is putting out to say data scientists are the sexiest people and they have a special brain that goes through data, that's all nonsense. That's not going to happen. We're not going to evolve that fast. And they ain't that sexy. I've seen my engineers. They don't look that sexy, but they're building the kind of tools that
Or are they
Present company excluded.
So anyway, it's a whole new platform, guys. It's kind of like what we take mobile for granted today, right? It's not like we know how our phones work. No, none of us do. But we do so much stuff on it. We've got a new mobile appendage to our brains today. We're going to have a new data sense to our brains. We're going to do things with data that we had never thought, but the tools are going to make it possible. So it's kind of like mobile. This is a data world that we're entering.
It's hard to follow Radhika's comments
Colorful
here because I'm afraid I'm going to make sober comments. No, but on the education front, that is very near and dear to my heart. And I think I can give a couple of examples. One, in my own profession of marketing and advertising research, I think we always found that a combination of skills, people who, this is an old-fashioned idea, but when I went to college, the rationale for taking a liberal arts education is almost exactly what we need now, which is the careers, Mike, that you'll be in 20 or 30 years, whatever, are going to be so different than what you can think of now that really you should be liberally educated to think, jump around, and so on. And so I know that my profession has attracted people like myself from psychology, sociology, anthropology, engineering, statistics, et cetera. And I think everybody brings something to the party. And I believe that in this data era, the same thing. You need some statistical skills, but you need to be inquisitive. I like Radhika's term, number sense. I think maybe have a number sense. But the second one, a concrete example, especially because I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. Some of you may know about this, and this is really dating myself, so apologies for this. But in the 1980s, when the market research industry faced a shortage, a true shortage of qualified analysts, then they didn't just say, well, we're going to rely on good fortune to create the next round of analysts. In fact, what happened was Coca-Cola down the street and P&G in Cincinnati, where I was living at the time, they actually went, how far away is Athens from here? Maybe
Hour
away.
Yeah.
They went an hour away to the University of Georgia, and they actually created a program there, funded by Coke, P&G, General Mills, et cetera. It was see if I have this right, it's a one-year master's program in market research, fully funded for excellent students, and that attracted, I think at first 12, then 15 and 20. I served on the board for a number of years. That in turn caused the University of Texas at Arlington to form one, University of Wisconsin at Madison, and one or two others. So there was actually a formal effort made by our industry to say, we need this skill set. It's not happening on its own. We need more Polos out there, but we're going to have to fund them to make it happen. And we may need that. I don't know if Polo and a few of the others who are doing it, like at the Wharton School, where I attended a conference recently, are going to be enough. If this becomes a tidal wave, like Radhika seems to think, she's probably right, then we may, as an industry, we may have to make a formal effort to support teachers, and we have to direct students, not just by luck, but by making it very clear that this is a great career opportunity. Go there.
I want, again, since we're trying to cover a lot in this short time, please, anyone who has questions, come on up, because I'll stop if I see someone at the mic, but otherwise I've got a long list of questions I'm going to keep going with. But I do want to talk about something that came up in Ralph de la Vega's session last night, and I think it was through the Q&A, and talk a little bit about a quote I recently read that I can't attribute to you, so apologize. But basically, that there's a concern that the word is that big data is our generation's civil rights issue, and we don't know it. So can you talk a little bit about privacy, security, and how open we are about sharing that, and how companies and organizations are using that information?
Well, let me go with that first. If you're on the grid, I'll tell you there's no privacy. That's a part of the Brave New World. People can get to you based on your data, not just on what you do, but who you're connected to, right? So now, here's a question. It's, I hate to answer a question with a question. We don't seem to take offense that, Coke or Land's End is trying to sell us one more, pair of shoes or jacket or whatever. We take great offense if any law enforcement agency or the government is trying to protect us, right? So it's almost debatable. Now, all the marketing companies, they have so much information about you. They don't need permission to farm this. They bombard you with emails. They know so much, it's almost scary. And they're marrying stuff. Polk data gets married with TV viewing data, so they know who's bought the Ford, cars, which shows they're going to watch, how do we hit it with the right, ads so that you go and buy more Fords. Now, if the government did that with your data, I think it would be like Poindexter all over again, and we'd bring the entire government to a halt. So I'm telling you that issues around privacy, we need to really look at both sides of it, right? It's what does it really mean to us?
I think that Radhika and I were seated next to each other just so we can disagree on about half the things we say. No, although I am sensitive to what
We
you
embrace
say.
tension.
I think on the positive side, I have to say, this isn't to whitewash anything. I'm sure that much, stuff's going on out there. But I do have to say, at least for the companies I'm working with, I'm actually impressed by the efforts they're making to protect privacy. So that Nielsen, of course, when we sign up a panelist, there's a privacy statement that says we won't do so-and-so with that. I don't know the content of every one of those. It may differ as a function of whether or not you're a television panelist privacy signer, or if you're part of the household panel where we collect your purchase data. But I'm actually impressed with the serious effort that companies make and that our lawyers hold us to. And that actually includes Facebook. So, for example, in some of the analyses that I did that connected buzz to program ratings, the part of Facebook data we were allowed to use it's called the public face part of Facebook. And then the private part we don't have access to because Facebook doesn't allow us to do it. So again, not to whitewash anything, but I feel like that companies, big respectable companies, are making serious efforts to write privacy policies and then to maintain them. And that if you come up with a new thing like marrying this and this, I've actually had conversations where the research director would say, Mike, that's a good marketing idea, but before I do that, we're going to have to really revisit the privacy. We're going to have to meet with the lawyers, and I respect that. So I hope people know that that's happening too.
Yes,
Mike, I
for
think
those
the
with the white
reason we're
hat.
sitting next to each other, you are right. I think all that legality that the lawyers go through is so Clinton-esque, it's not even funny, right? It's not what they say, it's what they don't say that really matters, which is why every few months we have a showdown, with Facebook, right? And Facebook is probably like one of the biggest violators of this. So long story short, yes, I think legal, lawyers will draft stuff that makes everybody kind of, feel like, oh, I think we're doing the right thing. But no, underneath it, we're not. The data is like water that's going to gush through this dam. It's going to break through the walls. There is so much of it. I think we're going to see a resurgence in all the questions around civil liberties and privacy. That's another arena. No, we are not going to be able to contain this, because for every lawyer who wants to do the right thing, there are 10 capitalists who are so greedy who want to do the wrong thing. And that's what America is all about.
Okay. On that, Polo, I know you were trying to jump in this conversation too, so I want to hear from both you and Eric. So please, feel free.
So one quick comment on privacy. I think social media has changed the meaning or the concept of privacy. So in the older days, when you talk about privacy, you only think about yourself. But these days, when you talk about privacy, you have to think about what your friends do. So I'll give you an example. So on Facebook, I'm pretty private about my thing, but sometimes my friend would tag me on the photo. So I say, well, if you tag me on the photo, I'm going to unfriend you. The reason is, so even I'm not telling other people that I'm at a particular venue, but if my friends tag me, and then they say where they are, then they are basically leaking my information, right? So that kind of changes how you perceive what privacy is. So these say you cannot just think about what you are not telling other people. You also need to think about what your friends are not telling people or what they are telling people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yes, that's a fantastic point. I definitely fall on the side of there are risks and benefits, and I think the benefits here outweigh the risks in terms of the systems we can build and the science we can do. That said, I have two comments. One is that if you look through a social history of the United States, privacy is actually a very 20th century concept. So it is socially constructed, and it's very possible that we will have a new social construction of privacy in this century as opposed to centuries before. And the other is that it's actually really hard to enforce privacy. So an example that I love is that, so AOL, which has a search engine, wanted to help search engine researchers a few years back, and so they released a corpus of search engine data that was anonymized. And the search queries said, user ID, search query, time. That was it. It was a giant text file. And so it had no names, no nothing. All I knew was that ID number 7 made this query, and later on ID number 7 made the same query. They released it. It was up online for 24 hours before it was taken down because multiple individuals had been identified simply by their search query history. And one of them was tracked down by a New York Times reporter and interviewed, right? So despite the best intentions, right, and actual, they took technical precautions. It just seems very difficult to anonymize and make this data private.
We have a question from the audience, and others, please stand on up and come forward. Please introduce yourself.
Sure, Dick Sorensen. I'm mobile and wireless consultant. First of all, to answer, I think, Radhika's question about what is okay to be private and what's not. And I think for me personally, since I tend not to do things illegal, and I tend not to go on the grid with things that I would be embarrassed to tell my own mother, I don't worry about privacy on the grid too much. So long as what's known and tracked about me is factual. And that leads to my question, which is, where and how do you filter bad data? And I'm thinking about these diffusion events, things that we've seen recently with Hurricane Sandy, where photoshopped images of here's what happened were clearly not factual. Tweets that get through to the press, they later have to issue retractions that there were 3 feet of water on the stock exchange floor. Executives over at the BBC have to, where do you glean what's good data going into your analysis and what's not? Because social media in particular has this ability to propagate misinformation.
Can I start by answering that question? So that's a fantastic point. It's an open and active research area. So one of my students is working on this very problem as her dissertation. So are there signatures of rumors and misinformation that we can detect early? So for example, if you tweet something that is retweeted 50 times, but everyone is saying in response, really? Seriously? Or is that it, right? That's probably a pretty good indication that maybe we shouldn't trust this, right? And there's other things, right? So we can actually look at the language that people use. So people who are lying actually use more first-person pronouns when they write things down. So there are signatures like this that you can computationally detect. We don't know if it's going to work completely, but we might make some headway.
So I think from the algorithm side of view, there are a big class of data mining algorithms. That's what they call anomaly detection algorithm. So basically, it's to detect what is abnormal. So for a lot of the bad data, they actually are abnormal because they only happen once in a while, and they have very different characteristics, such as the features that Eric was talking about. So there are ways to do it, but then the tricky part here is how to do it really quickly, before the bad things get spread. Right? Yeah.
Because of what those two gentlemen said, I think, and going back to cocktail party conversation last night, I'm going to give a two-sided answer to that. I think statistically, it always makes sense, whether your data set is 100 or 1,000 or now 10 million, to look at outliers and to look at extremes and then say, and actually examine them. I remember doing a market test in the 90s where the average purchase cycle and amount purchased was, say, 6 weeks, and you would buy 1 bottle or possibly 2. And yet, in the test, we saw one person who bought 37. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not going to use that data. That I can't do anything with it. It throws averages off, and it was faked in some way, and there was something wrong there. So I think outlier detection is useful in that sense, to get a better analysis. Now, back to the conversation from last night. One of the points that was made, Radhika, you might have made this one too, but one of the points I picked up was that because of really big data sets, we might now learn something from outliers. Like in the past, there might have been 1 or 2 outliers in a data set of 1,000. But now if you have 100 million, it could be that incremental learning at the margin that doesn't fall into your main analysis, where I'm still going to do the means and standard deviations, I apologize, but I'm probably still going to do that. But from the outliers, from the 25 outliers at the end, I may find an idea for a new product or a new way to spin something I never thought of before. And so there the outlier analysis, rather than being, quote, bad, actually could be good. And so that part's exciting. Let's not dismiss outliers right away. Again, I think we can separate them from the main body of the statistical analysis, but then through that separation and examination of what the outliers actually look like on the positive side and the negative side, open ourselves up to incremental learning at the margin.
That's very encouraging, in part because, by example, I'm sure that there's a number of people in Oklahoma City who years ago wished that big data could have figured out that Tim McVeigh bought a whole bunch of nitrate.
There you go. Yeah. Now, it could have taught something as opposed to just throw the data out.
Dick, that kind of takes me to, as the data volume increases, we are going to have suspicious data. But all data that looks suspicious may not be suspicious, right? The flash crash, 600 points, when the Dow Jones drops. I mean, that was not an anomaly. That was actually happening. When this guy photoshopped the shark going down, the street. I mean, that was, right? So where we need to get smarter, this kind of brings me back to what big data is about, is not believing just one piece of information, but actually tying it to many pieces of information that now you hit it with a layer of algorithms that say, okay, give me some kind of a sanity test. And the last piece is this additional kind of number sense and reality check that our data scientists of the future are going to have. That goes, that's junk. Wow, that is actually a flash crash. Guys, get on it, right? Because Bank of America said we had 30 seconds to react to flash crash. You don't have time for data mining and anomaly detection and blah, 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 all the old statistical methods that Mike's talking about. You don't have time. You have 30 seconds, react to it. So no, we are coming into extremely exciting times, and I'm very bullish about it.
I respect the fact that she's not saying I'm all.
No, we did not do that.
The
Yes,
methods
and
are-
uncool and all that. No, I'm going to go back to a question from the audience.
Fascinating discussion. One of the things that, when you were talking about the civil rights question of our generation around data, the panel took it in only one direction, which was around privacy and the protection of data. What about the emancipation of data? What about public data sets? The idea that data right now is only existing, for the most part, behind closed commercial walls. Data about governance, data about civic functions. How, do you have any interesting examples of where people's rights and access and use of the data and this new literacy around data might actually start to change dialogue with citizens, either with government or with corporations?
So the best example of that I know of about on that front, it's kind of an outlier, but Google's been kind of an early mover on this stuff. So you can actually download a lot of your data for export from various Google products. And I think that's really originating from the engineers they hire. So the engineers on the inside don't like that the data is all captured by this one monolithic company and can't be taken away. But that's really one of the few data points in this area that I know of.
So I can add to that, Bo. So Symantec, the company, did develop Norton Identifier, so I've been working with them for a long time. So recently they launched a program which is to share the data with academia. So they have a lot of data, terabyte and terabyte, even petabyte of data. So I think probably they are one of the early examples of doing that. And another source, I think, is actually from the government. I know if I got the name right, but there's an open data initiative, actually from the US government. So they're trying to share all these data, definitely anonymized, but also there are a lot of different type of it. So I think if you search for open data, US government, then you will be able to find that website.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to push a little bit further on this topic, and not so much on the open data side, but looking for sources anywhere in the world to help understand what's going on. But rather, a lot of what we're talking about in social media is we have to find the social media. So, right now, Facebook, Twitter, in old days, MySpace or others. But
don't forget about email.
And email, right? Email, blog posts, all the rest of that. But I'm curious for those of you that are seeking out information that might be in the social realm, how do you find the next Twitter? As these things ebb and flow, which they do over and over and over again, and certainly in the international space, there are different sources of information. Well, what are tricks of the trade of how do you find the voices you're looking for?
I'll take a little of that because I went to my first conference on, I guess was actually formally called social television. And this space is changing so fast that just to give an example of what's happening there, I went to the conference in April, and then because I went to that, I became a judge at the next conference, which was the first ever social TV awards, and just because I ended up showing up at that. But at that conference, one of the cool things that they did that I didn't expect was, besides having a number of entrepreneurs there who talked about the latest, greatest thing, because one thing for sure is social TV, for example, it sounds like it's one comment, but I found that it could be differentiated into 6 or 7 different things. People meant different things by saying social TV. So I think one place to find it is you go to a conference, listen to the unbelievable entrepreneurial set that literally is working in their garages and saying, yeah, social TV isn't that. Look at what I've got. And then in the afternoon, they actually had a very neat panel of venture capitalists who were there and who were saying, here are the criteria that we're using to fund the next big idea and how many we funded and what the criteria were. So I think you do have to go to conferences. Besides just reading the buzz on your own industry, go out there. Part of my coming here is to meet people like these panelists and to learn something new. You have to open yourself up to it.
I'd like to add to Mike's comments. Of course, we work with, not just private company, but the public companies as, agencies as well. We have access to 250 data sources I have access to data sources. I can't even pronounce the names of these sources. They come from Russia. They come from China. They come from the Middle East. They are transliterations. They're languages that are blended with stuff. The amount of data is unbelievable, right? So Twitter and Facebook, by the way, ends up being the smallest source for us, and it's all so self-promoting. It's like ends up being pretty useless, the way Eric said, people always telling you how fantastically fabulous they are. But, which leads me to, because there are so many data sources, it actually goes to the question, that she asked, which is, I think that people will have access to a new kind of information, which is not as sanitized. We're so used to listening to Fox and ABC and the kind of junk that they shovel out at us. I think we're going to see a new emergence of media that we haven't seen before. So that's a part of how this will impact consumers, maybe 5 to 10 years from now. That's what's coming.
Great. We're going to go back to the audience. Dara?
Hi, I'm Dara Matamoyo with the Georgia Tech Research Institute. My question is, back on the algorithms, what do you all think the opportunities or the tools that mathematicians will maybe end up utilizing for these algorithms? I'm asking because just in my experience back on Facebook, it almost feels like the algorithm has taken over. It's no longer actually mirroring social behavior. My friends, we all complain on Facebook about the algorithm. You have, the same 7 or 12 people seeing your posts and not the other 100 or 200 people not seeing your posts, which defeats the entire point of Facebook for a lot of people. So a lot of us have gone back to actually emailing each other or going to each other's wall to post something. And people saying, hey, I can't find you, I haven't heard from you. And it's become sort of a frustrating joke. And so going forward, my question is, what do you all think, these algorithms, will they actually be able to be married or mirror social behavior and not just so it's not all about the algorithm and there's a disconnect with how people are actually behaving. So then you're not measuring what you think you're measuring.
So I'll take a shot at that one. So one way I would frame that is in terms of something Polo and I were talking about before we got mic'd up, which is that it's frustrating to be on the other side of the black box algorithm, right? I would reframe what you just said as I don't understand how newsfeed works, and it frustrates me what comes up in the feed and how my posts get rerouted to other people. I don't get it. And I don't get it, right? I study this stuff and I don't get it. So I think, something, Polo and I were talking about was, I think I hope there's going to be this push to make algorithms more interpretable by people, as opposed to just the highest accuracy, highest performing model you can get. In much of my work, I would take a 5, maybe even 10% accuracy hit to really understand how the thing is working.
I'd like to add to Eric. I think you are at the mercy of algorithms. You're living in an algorithmic bubble right now. By the way, Facebook thinks my husband's gay, and so it pushes all this gay stuff at him, and it's hilarious. It's completely hilarious. You're living in a Google bubble as well. Google only gives you stuff that it thinks you need. It's a way of sifting through, the 97% of stuff and getting you the 3% relevance. What is relevance? Relevance is what that engine thinks you are and what is important to you. You have some utility function that this engine has decided Dara is blah, 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 blah. That's what gives it the ranking. So yes, you are in a bubble and you will always be from now on.
I want to go last on this one. So.
Okay. Well, so we have one more question. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask each of you to do sort of a lightning response.
I would like to address
Dara.
this one, though.
All right. Polo's dying to jump in, so let's let Polo first, then Mike, and then we'll have one last question from the audience.
Yeah. So I think from the algorithm point of view, I think there are different areas that people have been working on to kind of solve that problem, is to bring in more variety. So some algorithms are able to bring in different things, kind of balance a little bit, not just bring you like news from the same group of people, but also balance from different groups. And also some algorithms try to bring in serendipity. So every now and then they do kind of introduce something kind of totally unrelated, I don't know how well that worked, but some people are working on that. So that's the two areas that I can think of, at least from the algorithm side, where people are working on.
The reason I want to go last is because, actually back to the chart that Radhika maybe disagreed with. In some of the work I've done on big data analytics, I feel like classic analytics with, yes, classic approaches like factor analysis, multiple regression analysis, multidimensional scaling, maybe neural nets, et cetera. Some of the classic tools that should be in some of your toolkits, I found are useful to examine big data sets. It's more than just an algorithm. It actually says, okay, I'm going to approach a big data set, one that I worked on, 250 million data points of TV viewing, 600 television programs, quarters worth of data, 250 million data points. I found that by having a hypothesis about the data going in, as opposed to just vague data mining, so a data hypothesis, tools in the toolkit like correspondence analysis, factor analysis, regression analysis, and so on, that allowed us to come up with a good answer to a client question. So I think what I'm saying is algorithms are hard work, but that they're at the end of a chain. But I think there's a lot of room in really big data sets, not just to talk terabyte, petabyte, but actually to have analytic toolkits that you approach that data with, and then through a combination of math, art, and science, and maybe some learning that you pick up in the classes these gentlemen teach, you can come up with solutions or findings from this big data set.
Great.
And I'm not sure people are talking enough about that, so I wanted to get that in.
Thank you. Good. Just do a quick time check. Beth, okay, one more question, please.
Ron Johnson, thank you. I apologize in advance for my long question because I haven't had time to think about it. There's great opportunity here. I agree data is data, but data can become information. Information can become knowledge. We know for a fact in the sports world, take the World Series, the ads that people get up first cost more than the ads that are at the end of the game. And so my question for you is, do you know of any heuristics or algorithms where you would be willing to put a 95% confidence interval statement on it that would allow you in real time, including Nielsen, to tell me what this social media behavior means so that if I am an ESPN, I could change the price of my ads based upon what's happening during the game?
All right, I heard the word Nielsen, so maybe I'll give you said long question, I'll try to give a short answer. The timing, as I mentioned to Laurie last night, the timing of my presence on the panel here is good, because yesterday we announced that one of our units that I referred to already, NM Insights, which is a combination of Nielsen and McKinsey, a joint venture, yesterday announced actually that they acquired a group called Social Guide. And Social Guide has access to a bunch of Twitter data. I will just say that, and you can look it up on the internet, the Social Guide, just through a search. So there's a lot in your question. Let's just say that analytics of the type that Social Guide offers, coupled with some of the analytics that I've been doing trying to connect buzz to program rating, can, after effort and using some of the math tools that I referred to, can begin to quantify that stuff. I don't have an immediate answer where, oh yeah, I got the answer right here. But that is well within the space of what the industry is trying to do right now. Hope that helps. Definitely we're thinking about exactly that. Don't have the immediate answer. Oh yeah, like you said, your example was excellent. Hey, maybe for marketplace reasons, an ad at the beginning costs more than an ad at the end. Well, we've had 40 years experience to know that. But we don't have as much experience with these causal connections yet. We're going to try to figure that out. Excellent question.
So, Ron, let me take that. Real-time data analysis is really what Emcien does. And the reason we're in law enforcement is time is what you don't have, right? So when we had the Peachtree drop, we could surface in real time a white supremacist who had a machine gun in his backpack who had gotten through this. Long story short, yes, real-time analytics is what you need. We didn't go into marketing because marketing is about selling one more car as opposed to saving lives. But yes, that's exactly what Emcien does.
So we're getting towards the end of our session here. What I want to do was to get insights from the panelists. Since this is Georgia Tech and this is a research conference, what is the most important question to tackle on the research front, or what are a set of questions? We've heard a bit about visualization, about algorithms, about talent, but if you could put your thoughts together, that would be great, and I'll start with the industry folks and then move to my right.
Okay.
So Radhika, you're up. What would you like to see tackled and solved to make your world more effective?
Oh, actually, I think Mike, alluded to this. He talked about methods like, statistical measures that are so commonplace. I think what's going to happen is there are a new set of metrics and a new set of measures. Just like you guys take apps on your iPhone for granted, there are going to be a new set of measures that you will take for granted, and that will actually help you to tackle what's actually coming next. So Mike, in about 10 years, will be talking about those that they're so commonplace, like muffins on his countertop.
Wow.
Okay.
And so I'll be back in 10 years for you to do that. I think that maybe embedded in the answers I've given is really what I would like. Namely, our clients, whether they be P&G or NBC and CBS and so on, or Turner right down the street, I think they would really like to know what the role of social is in the marketing mix. Both on the, as I said before, the BOE side, is there really earned media? And if so, what is it worth? What if I pay for so-called earned media by saying I'm going to have a social program? What incremental contribution does that have to the marketing mix? Maybe that's on the advertiser side. On the network side, I probably alluded to this before, and part of the reason I'm doing the analysis I'm working on is how much does social actually contribute to a program rating? I think, Eric, you gave the example that I voted then actually could be shown in a causal sense to drive more voting. I want to be able to tease out to deconstruct how much of this interactive relationship between social buzz and tweeting and program rating is driven by the buzzing and the tweeting, and how much is in the other direction. I think those two are near-term things I'm excited by, and in fact, lucky enough to be working on.
I want to add one thing there, and some of you I know in the room have been on the back channel Twitter feed, but one of the comments came up earlier today is Amex sponsoring IPaT, because they were the promoted tweet, and everyone's like, why does this keep coming up? And really, I think for the community that was following the IPaT 12 hashtag, they didn't have any interest in Amex, and so Amex in this case was getting this sort of backlash, very small, because I don't think our distribution's that broad, but it's sort of interesting of the early attempts of trying to tie marketing and social media and messaging that are going to hit a few speed bumps in the short term. Yes,
yeah,
Eric.
so I'll echo Mike's point. Getting at causal relationships is just super hard. And we're doing that in a bunch of different domains, but so for example, if we had found in our results on image analysis that white, the color white, was really good for spreading images on Pinterest, well, does that mean that we react to white, or does that mean Pinterest is good for weddings, right? And getting at that causal relationship is really important, right? You don't want to say that, hey, you need more white in your images, because that's going to make them spread on Pinterest, when what's really happening is weddings are popular on Pinterest, right? The other thing that we're working on from a more design perspective is this, what's commonly known as the filter bubble problem. So Dara alluded to it earlier. So we know that we're exposed to ideas and beliefs that are similar to our own. How can we combat that through design? So we're actually looking at design problems that kind of try to say, oh, you shouldn't friend that person. You should friend this person, right? And for reasons of trying to escape this filter bubble.
Great. Polo.
So I see that actually two challenges, and both of them are related to my research. So the first one, I think, is how to bring the power of machine to people. So meaning, how do you help people understand what the machine is doing? For example, on the question that came up about like Facebook keep recommending the same thing to you, or like pushing the same thing to you. So can you explain to people why this is happening, right? So not just dictate what the people should be listening or hearing, but really tell them why. So that's the first thing, like bringing power of the machine to people. The second thing is how to merge capabilities of machine with the intuition of people. So people are really good at doing a lot of things. They have the excellent perception capabilities. They can really tease out the really minute differences between things, which are not really good, what the machines are good for. They are really good at chunking a lot of data, going through a lot of things. but then sometimes they do make mistakes, right? So how do we combine these to the computation and also the machine? So those are the two challenges that I think will.
Can I just make one more
course.
addition? Thank you. I would like to, I know this being Georgia Tech, and I heard Radhika say math and other people say math. For the math folks out there, I'd like to put a teaser out there that a partial solution to the bilateral causality question, which I can't expound on, but I think a partial solution lies in an area known as structural equation modeling, a partial least square. So write that down. I think that is a way of getting at bilateral causality that I need to examine further. And then in the other area of the actual social big data sets, I think that there's actual promise here in the mathematics associated with fractals, which underlie chaos math. Because fractals look at, if you ever look at a fractal pattern, there are some metaphorical, structural, visual similarities to the unfolding of a fractal, including areas like strange attractors and so on, look visually not that dissimilar from the unfolding of a social net. So I think that there's promise there as well in using fractal mathematics as a way, not to model perfectly, but to model directionally, I think, what the social unfolding looks like.
Great. Well, with that, we're wrapping up our session. Beth, would you like to make some comments? First, I'd like to thank Polo, Eric, Mike, and Radhika. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Laurie, and our panel. That was a fantastic discussion, and I think everyone is now Googling all of these mathematical challenges for the audience as well. We'll have a contest for solving those challenges by next year. So right now, you have two very important things that you get to look forward to. The first is lunch, and the second is a tremendous set, really a candy store of research demonstrations by our faculty and by our students. Conveniently for you, they are both located in the same place. And actually, in the process of finding the demonstrations, you should just run amongst food as well. So everyone will be exiting this building. We'll just be crossing the street where there is no crosswalk, so please be careful, and go over into the Technology Square Research Building, and we have demonstrations on the second and third floor, and there should be plenty of folks to help escort you and show you along the way. Please be back by 3 p.m. sharp. We have a special announcement to share with you, so that is the teaser to come back to be in the know on a particularly special announcement for Georgia Tech. And then we will be able to conclude with our civic computing panel and then our discussion of the Convergence Innovation Competition and the student winners of that competition. So see you back here at 3. Enjoy the demonstrations and the food and the conversation.